Okay, so in the first part, we discussed how baking works and generally just understanding normal maps and how they work and how to get good results. So for this part, what I want to do is I want to go through a few different examples of how you actually create high poly models for use with normal maps. And so we're going to cover some fairly simple models, but that show a diverse range of possible options. And then we're going to discuss how you go through creating like basic smooth models that you can use to create high polys, basic content for producing information from floaters or sort of assets that are not included in the low poly geometry, and just generally showing some of the things that you can do to sort of trick the eye using normal maps. So this will be a fairly comprehensive discussion. So we'll try to just jump into it so you guys can get a good baseline for it. So first off, I just started with a cube here. It's a 100 by 100 by 100 cube. It's just a normal model that you would create in the polygon modeling. So what we're going to want to do is we want to make a high poly version of this cube, and then we want to make sure that the UVs and all that stuff are laid out properly. So the first, actually, let's go ahead and do the UVs first. So if I open up the UV editor, we'll notice that this UV is laid out well enough that you could actually see a normal map on it. But what you'll notice is actually that if you were to just bake the normal map like this, everywhere where the edges are connected, you would actually see an artifact in the normal map. And that's because of what we discussed in part 1, which is that any surfaces that are not on the same plane or the same smoothing group will show an artifact where the pixel is drawn right at the edge, because there's going to be a transition that is not 100% pixel perfect, that will be on this side one color and on this side another color. And it's basically essentially impossible to try to get that so that it's correct without having a little bit of a gap. So what we'd want to do here is we just want to go and take all of these edges. So if we right click and select edge, I'm going to shift drag to grab those edges in the middle. It really doesn't matter. I should actually probably grab all of the edges if I wanted to, because it's just a box. But then I can go to cut and sew and select cut. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, select UVs, double click on each of the UVs here, the UV shells. And I'm just going to try to arrange them so they have a little bit of separation between them, but are laid out roughly as well as I can put them. Now, because this is a 6-sided cube, we're not going to be able to get perfect utilization of the UV space here, but we can do as well as we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this out so it takes roughly that space. Then I want to quickly turn on my checker so I can see this not overlapping. And then there we go. That should be good. We can push it over to one side or put it in the middle. I think that'll be fine. And so now, basically, I want to say that, for example, a lot of the content that would be produced for game production might be using, say, for example, ZBrush. And I have some videos on my channel that discuss some basic workflow for ZBrush. So if you're interested in that, you can look at that for more detail. But what I'm about to show you is essentially how you do high poly models with either subdivision modeling or with the crease workflow, which is available in Maya. Now, both of these are valid options and are totally viable alternatives to using ZBrush that quite a few artists will use in professional studios. It really just depends on the workflow. Now, there's definitely advantages to ZBrush, but I just want to let you know this is a totally valid idea. And in general, when you're working with assets in ZBrush, a lot of similar principles can apply, particularly when talking about the crease workflow, because there's a lot of there's a lot of overlap there. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and close these UVs. I'm going to duplicate this cube, and I'm actually going to duplicate this cube twice. So I'm going to create cube high, and then I'm going to hit Control D. I'm going to duplicate this again, but then I'm going to make this one cube high crease. And so we'll make two different versions of this so that it's clear. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to hide my cube low and my cube high crease, and we're going to talk about cube high. So first off, the thing that you want to know is that in order to make high poly models, you generally want to smooth meshes. And you can hit the 3 key in Maya to see a preview of a smooth mesh, and this will give you an idea of like what to expect for your final model. So this one looks obviously like if you just smooth this model, it would turn it into a sphere, which is not going to be particularly useful. But basically what you can do is you can build what's called control edges to define the shape more tightly so that you can keep the overall shape while still getting some softness or some smooth edges, right? And so doing that is actually fairly straightforward. There's a lot of different tools for doing it. First, one of the very easy tools is you can go to Mesh Tools and select Insert Edge Loop Tool. So I can go ahead and I can just click on an edge here. And then if I hit the 3 key, you'll notice that actually it defines that edge much more tightly. And then I'm going to go and create another edge on the opposite side. And you'll notice it starts binding that to be a more uniform shape. Now, in most cases, you're probably going to want to make sure that your edges are somewhat equidistant. And if you were doing insert edge loop, although it does get the job done in most cases, it may not be 100% uniform. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 1 on the keyboard to go back to the regular model for a second. And I'm going to switch to opening up the modeling toolkit. And then I can just, in this case, because it's pretty easy to do, I can just drag a selection across the entire span of the model here, and I can select Connect. Then in the options, I can actually click on Segment, and I can middle mouse drag to the right a little bit, so it uses 2 connect segments. Then I can click on Pinch, and then I can middle mouse drag to the right, and I can just expand that out in a way that makes sure that these are uniform shapes. And the only thing we want to watch out for is that this corner piece is roughly kind of like a square shape, so that we know that that's going to be what roughly an even sizing between both sides. Then I can hit Enter when I'm done. And then what's really nice about the Connect tool is that it preserves the last tool settings that I used. So I can then drag a selection going the other direction. I'm going to hold down or hit the 3 key real quick. And you'll notice there's a little bit of pinching here. But if I hit the Connect tool, it's the segments 2, pinch 185. And then there you go. Okay. And that's actually not really that difficult. Looks like we pretty much got what we needed to get here. And then if I hit the 3 key, you can see if I select object mode and then just sort of click off of this, you can see roughly what that smooth mesh will do. Now, this is just a smooth preview, so we actually have to commit the smooth to the model in order to make this work. So I always want to hit 1 on the keyboard before I smooth, because I don't want it to smooth the smooth, which, depending on your computer performance, could actually make that work incorrectly. It could cause your computer to freeze or something like that. So you just want to be a little bit careful of that. But I'm going to go ahead and go to Mesh Smooth Options. Now, you can do a different number of smooth settings. I often will do at least 3. And for crease, I usually do more. But we'll talk a little bit more about why that works that way. So we got a divisions of 3. Pretty much all the other settings, I just leave default. And then you can just hit smooth. And then if you wanted more, for example, like say this is making 7,000 triangles. If I want to add more divisions, I can also drag it over here. And it caps out at 4, but you can type out values higher than that. It just starts getting really, really smooth at that point. But actually, I mean, in this case, 5 might be fine. So one thing that you want to note about this is if you look at the edge flow on the model, there's a much tighter edge flow around the corners, and it's a more expansive, wider separation between verts as you get towards the flat faces of this model. And that's because of the fact that it basically is smoothing a model that has more polygons around the edges than there are polygons in the center of the faces. And that allows this to be fairly optimal while still having all the details that you're looking for. So that's something just to be a little bit mindful of, because we'll see why that's significant when we go into the crease variation. So, but for right now, let's go ahead and just bake a normal map for this really quickly. I'm going to go to the cube below. I'm going to unhide that. I'm going to switch from the modeling to the rendering tab, go to lighting, shading, transfer maps. And then I have my cube low poly shape. I'm going to switch that to the envelope really quick just to see. And oftentimes I actually use similar values. So, I mean, honestly, this is probably fine. Then for the source meshes, I'm going to add the cube high. I also want to hit the W key or the Q key just to move out of the add divisions tool. Add selected. And then I already have a normal map here from the previous video, but if you don't have that, you can just hit the normal map again. Just be mindful that if you do that multiple times, it will create multiple normal maps, and it'll actually just bake the normal map several times, which is not what you want. So I'm just going to go through. I've got my normal map. I'm actually just changed the name of this one. In this case, I know I'm making a cube normal, cube underscore normal. I already know that I set my Maya common output to 1024, 1024, and then I'm assigning to new shader, so that's all fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit bake. And this will take just a second to get all the baking done. This is the worst part about doing extended videos, is that I should probably just edit those out. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide my high poly cube really quick. And then I'm just going to hit the 6 key on the keyboard. And you can see that this is how we produce like a nice, smooth, soft edge on this cube. And because we separated those UV sections, we can zoom way into this and we don't see any errors on those corners. So everything looks super, super nice. Really, the only way that you ever see like a problem with it is if you're looking just straight on at a sharp grazing angle, very close, and then you can see where the model itself is actually not that that detailed. But in general, this is a really good workflow to be able to follow, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with it. So, okay, so we got this this basic setup here, and for now, I'm going to minimize the transfer maps, but I'm going to open up the cube high crease, and we'll talk really quickly about some of the options that are available here. So, so let's go ahead and hide the low poly cube. I'm going to hit Control H. I'm going to take a look at this crease model. Now, we could do creases exactly the same way that we did the other piece. But because creases actually have some distinct advantages that make the process a lot easier, I want to show you with a slightly more complicated mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select face on this high poly model. I'm going to grab all of the faces here. I'm going to select extrude. I'm going to turn keep faces together off. I'm going to offset a little bit. So I get the impression that there's a little bit of like an kind of an inset there. Then I'm going to extrude again, and then this time I'm going to do. Oh, actually, I hit divisions by mistake. I'm going to do a little bit of an offset and a local Z translate, just to subtly let's subtly make it look like it's bowing outward. And so then that's kind of a basic shape here. And so this is something that might be quite common to do for a high poly model. If I hit 3 on the keyboard, obviously it's going to have a little bit more shape to it than the original one because it has some more dimension to it. But we still have a lot of things that this does not have. And so in general, what we want to do is we actually want to use creases to make it that it controls the edges rather than defining explicit control edge loops. And so in this case, I'm going to go about doing that by making sure that actually, you know what? Let's say hypothetically we're gonna crease all of these edges. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, select all these edges. Then I'm going to go to Windows, Modeling Editors, Crease Sets. And the first thing I'm going to do is just create a new crease set. And I think I'm going to call this overall crease, just so it's clear. And then if I hit the 3 key, you'll notice that it looks a little strange because it's kind of holding its shape, but it's also looking like it's got some weird lighting deformation. And the actual reason for that is because creases don't actually create any additional geometry. So if we were to smooth this at the same value that we would a normal model, it would not smooth accurately because it would have not enough smooth subdivisions to really get the details that we're looking for. And just to kind of show you how that works, I'll quickly do the smooth so that you can see it. So I'm going to go select the rendering tab, go to modeling, and I'm going to go to mesh smooth. And what you'll notice is that there's a certain amount of detail that's there. But as you go through it, so with 3, it's got some. If you do 1, it actually doesn't do really much in the way of subdivisions at all. If you do 2, it has some subdivisions, but they don't really impact the shape. If you do 3, it's starting to impact the shape a little bit. And if you do 4, it's starting to impact the shape a little bit more. And the reason for that is just that if you look at how many subdivisions it's making, you'll notice that it doesn't make any additional subdivisions at the edges. It's essentially doing an even topology of all of the subdivisions that are here. That's because we're controlling the edges with a crease, not with extra geometry. So in general, what you want to try to do is you want to try to get a subdivision value that's enough that you can actually see the subdivision in the shape. So for example, it would be, say, you could use 6, and that would produce a relatively high polygon model, but it would show you roughly the kind of effect that you're probably looking for in most cases. But I'm going to go ahead and hit the Z key a few times and undo that, because I want to go back to editing the crease set, because obviously just smoothing it and sort of hoping that it looks right doesn't give us as much control as we would get over, say, the control edges, where we can sort of define where they're placed and then decide what the outcome will be. So in this kind of a case, I would want to make sure that I can actually get a smooth preview that is more accurate, so it doesn't just do that kind of weird thing that you see there. And in order to do that, you actually just have to change the setting on the model so that it can do a smooth preview that is more subdivided. So I can go to the attribute editor, click on smooth mesh. It's under cube, high, crease, shape. And then it says preview subdivision levels are 2. You want to do at least 4, but you might want to do 5 or 6. I think that 4 is a good sort of compromise. It doesn't show you exactly what the final model would be if you smoothed it at 6. But for a lot of people's computers, 4 is going to run better than 6. So I would do at least 4, but up to 6. For preview division levels. And then if I select that model and I hit the 3 key, then you'll notice now that it actually is showing the right kind of creasing, and we can actually get some meaningful feedback there. But now, this model looks a little squishy, so I don't necessarily want that to look like that. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go and say, I actually just want to change the value for the crease. And so generally, the crease being a lower value means that it's essentially not creased or becoming less creased. As you increase that number, it becomes a tighter representation of the model's core shape. So say 3 here is pretty tight. 4 there at that point is very, very tight. And this will ultimately just depend on what kind of shape you want. And what's cool here is, I mean, so although I did this all as the one shape of the model, I can do this with individual sections of the model, and I can crease them to different amounts. So let's just go with this for right now, and then I'll jump to the next models, and we'll sort of see the examples there. So, okay, so we've got this creased model. I want to make sure I hit the 1 key, so I go back to the original version. I'm going to go ahead and close the crease set editor for now. And I'm going to go to Mesh Smooth. And I think I'm just going to type in a value of 6, which will probably get me roughly what I want. And then we can see, okay, cool. So we got this general shape detail here. Okay, so I'm going to click on the cube below. I'm going to hit Shift H to unhide it. Remember, I minimized the transfer maps before. So the only thing I want to do here to change the model that we're using is just go to the source mesh, select on the cube, high, crease, and go to add selected. Or actually, I should clear all, and then add selected so that it makes sure that it only has that one model. And then I'm just going to use the same settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit bake. And because I don't have include materials turned on, that shouldn't cause any conflicts. Okay. So then I'm going to grab my cube high crease, hit Control H. And then you can take a look at kind of what that produced for our low poly model, right? And so you can see that there are some things that it did do, which is it created the impression that the object has a general lighting contour. It does make it look like it's a smoother model, especially around the corners. What it didn't do is make it look like that those edges, when viewed at a grazing angle, are soft, and it didn't make it look like that model actually has dimension when viewed from like a steep angle. So this is one of the just general limitations of normal maps. This will be the case in pretty much any model that you ever work on, but it's just something to be mindful of, just to make sure that you're aware of it. So now, if we wanted to make this potentially a little bit more accurate, we could go to our low poly and we could add some rough geometry like the actual extrusion of these faces. And then when we bake that, it would be a whole heck of a lot more accurate than it would be if we didn't have all that. But for right now, I think I'm just concerned about getting this basic detail in here. And if I go to lighting, use all lights, then I can go to the rendering tab for a second. And I can click on, say, a point light, and you can just get an idea of like sort of what that looks like, because you can see it a little clearer when there's actually like a direct light source from a specific direction. You can kind of see how that normal map affects it. But so in general, it's important to note that if this object is completely unlit, it's essentially not going to look like it has this kind of effect. So you really want to have a lit surface to make sure that it is taking full advantage of your normal map. So, okay, but so for right now, that's fine. So let's go ahead and work on a couple more models. So we'll just do some stuff really quickly so that we can show some additional things that you can do with high poly models.